It's the most famous secret base in the world. A place so mysterious that its very existence was denied for decades. But while people imagine aliens and hangars, the truth of Area 51 is just as strange, and in many ways far scarier than you can imagine. This is The Other Side. My name is John, and tonight we're going to pull apart the secret history of Area 51 and talk about how a dusty patch in Nevada desert became ground zero for every conspiracy theory on Earth. Also, if you don't mind, drop a comment down below letting me know where you're tuning in from. My stats still say I'm semi-famous in Singapore, and I truly don't understand how. Anyway, let's get right into it. Imagine this. It's the mid-1950s. The Cold War isn't just heating up, it's boiling over. The United States knows the Soviets are racing ahead in their nuclear weapons program, and the Pentagon desperately needs a way to peer behind the Iron Curtain and spy on them without starting World War III. The solution to this problem? Build an airplane that can fly so high, so far, and so silently that no one could touch it. That aircraft was the U-2 spy plane. Now, before the U-2 could ever take to the skies, the government needed a secret test site. Something isolated, hidden, with a natural runway that stretched for miles. That's when officials at the newly formed CIA and the Air Force's Skunk Works team, led by a genius engineer named Kelly Johnson, stumbled upon a place in the Nevada desert. A massive dry lake bed called Groom Lake. On a map, Groom Lake was practically invisible. A blank stretch of nowhere, miles from the nearest highway and shielded by jagged mountain ranges. It was the perfect place to build what would later be nicknamed Area 51. Almost overnight, Groom Lake was transformed. Barracks, hangars, radio towers, all of which were thrown up in record time. Workers were flown in on unmarked planes and sworn to secrecy, and they were told if they knew better, not to ask questions. At first, the project didn't even have a name. The site itself was only referred to as grid coordinates, and on a government map, it was called Area 51. Now, here's where the story starts to get strange. The U-2 could fly at 70,000 feet, nearly twice as high as commercial airliners at the time. Pilots and civilians weren't used to seeing anything at that altitude, so when the U-2 glinted silver in the sun, slicing across the sky at impossible heights, it didn't look like any plane they'd ever seen. To them, it looked like a UFO. And there were a lot of these UFO sightings. In fact, later declassified CIA reports admitted that more than half of all UFO sightings during the 50s and 60s were actually U-2 test flights out of Area 51. But here's the kicker. Instead of correcting the record, the government leaned into the confusion. They couldn't admit the U-2 existed. That was still classified. So they let the public believe what they wanted, and that silence, that refusal to explain, only made the UFO rumors grow. And the U-2 was just the beginning. By the mid-1960s, Johnson and the Skunk Works team unveiled an aircraft so advanced it might as well have been science fiction. My favorite airplane, the SR-71 Blackbird. This jet could cruise at 85,000 feet and hit speeds over Mach 3. That is 3 times the speed of sound. Imagine standing in the Nevada desert, watching a black needle-shaped craft streak across the sky, leaving behind a shockwave boom and vanishing in just mere seconds. To the average observer, it didn't look man-made. It looked alien. UFO reports exploded around Groom Lake. Strange lights, shiny objects moving faster than anything should be able to. Locals swore they saw flying saucers darting through the night. In reality, they were witnessing the dawn of the most secret aviation program in history. But because the government's answer was always no comment, the myth was born. So, while the public thought aliens might be circling above Nevada, the truth was almost scarier. Those weren't visitors from another planet. They were weapons designed by us, and the government was more than happy to let the world think otherwise. The birth of UFO Mania around Area 51 didn't start with aliens at all. It started with America's own secret aircraft. If the U-2 and Blackbird gave birth to Area 51's secrecy, the culture of UFOs gave it a soul. By the late 1950s, the United States was living in the shadow of the atomic bomb. The Cold War was on every front page. Duck and cover drills were being taught in classrooms, and people were looking to the skies, partially out of fear of Soviet bombers, but also out of a deeper, stranger curiosity. Because just decades earlier, something happened in Roswell, New Mexico. Something that the government said was just a weather balloon that fell to the ground. But many suspected it was much more than that. That single story, an alien spaceship crash, a government cover-up, it planted the idea in the public's imagination that we were not alone and the government was hiding it. Now, combine that paranoia with a brand new wave of strange lights streaking across the Nevada desert skies. And what do you get? A recipe for UFO mania. And right in the middle of it all was good old Groom Lake. When test pilots flew the U-2, or later the SR-71 Blackbird, they were soaring at altitudes no one thought possible at the time. 70,000, even 80,000 feet high. To a farmer in Nevada looking up from a field or a pilot cruising in a standard airliner, these craft didn't look unusual. They looked impossible. Metallic objects glinting in the sunset, long needle-shaped silhouettes racing faster than anybody had ever seen. Sometimes the sun would hit the plane's fuselage just right, creating a flash that seemed to appear and disappear instantly. To the average person, it wasn't a plane. It was a UFO. It was an alien spacecraft. The reports flooded in, and throughout the late 1950s and 60s, the U.S. Air Force's official UFO investigation, Project Blue Book, cataloged thousands of sightings, and declassified reports later revealed the shocking truth. More than half of them were directly tied to flights out of Area 51. And again, instead of correcting the record, instead of reassuring the public, the government stayed silent. They didn't admit, they didn't deny, they just let people believe what they wanted. And that silence was gasoline on a fire. By the 1960s, Nevada wasn't a desert, it was a canvas for every extraterrestrial story possible. So much so that the lonely highway leading out toward Groom Lake, the same highway where people saw all of these thousands of UFOs, it was eventually renamed the Extraterrestrial Highway. The tiny town of Rachel, Nevada, which had a population of under 100 people, sat right on that road. At its center was a humble little diner that was nicknamed the Little Alien Inn. Inside, the walls were filled with alien stickers, UFO posters, and photographs by eyewitnesses. Truckers, tourists, and UFO hunters alike sat at that bar drinking a beer and swapping stories about strange lights over the desert. Some claimed they had seen glowing orbs dart across the horizon. Others swore they were buzzed by helicopters with no markings, no insignias, just black silhouettes in the night sky. It wasn't just stories people were sharing, though. People who strayed too close to the perimeter of Area 51 began reporting encounters with mysterious figures. Not soldiers, not police, but just men in desert camouflage. They were nicknamed Camo Dudes. The stories were always the same. You're hiking, maybe camping, and you suddenly spot them. A white pickup truck parked on the ridge. Or shadowy figures standing just inside the restricted zone. They don't wave. They don't yell. They just watch. If you get too close, the trucks start to follow you. Slowly at first, then closer and closer until you turn back and go the way you came. And the second you do, they vanish just as suddenly as they appeared. And if that wasn't eerie enough, the paranoia around Area 51 only seemed to grow with the arrival of the internet. In the 1950s, a man who I would consider a ufology legend, Glenn Campbell, moved out to the Nevada desert and made it his mission to document Area 51. He mapped back roads, scouted mountain ranges, and even camped on public land overlooking the base. He would publish his findings in a quirky newsletter called the Groom Lake Desert Rat, and it included everything from base patrol schedules to crude hand-drawn maps of what he thought lay inside the perimeter of Area 51. People loved the Groom Lake Desert Rat and all of Glenn's work. His work spread across the early online message boards like lightning, sparking endless debates and conspiracy theories. At this point, Area 51 wasn't just a rumor, it was a phenomenon. And the government's continued denial only fueled it further. For locals, tourists, and the growing online community, the logic was simple. If the government says nothing, it must be hiding something. By the late 1990s, Area 51 wasn't just a base, it was a legend. But in 1989, that legend would transform into something far stranger. Because that was the year one man stepped forward with a story that changed everything. By the late 1980s, Area 51 was already a place of whispers. Locals told stories of strange lights, tourists gathered at the Little Alien to swap UFO sightings, and conspiracy theories spread newsletters and early internet forums. But then one man stepped forward and made all of this explode into the mainstream. His name was Bob Lazar. In November of 1989, a Las Vegas TV journalist named George Knapp aired an interview that would change UFO history forever. The man sitting across from him disguised his identity. His voice was calm though, almost too calm, as he described something that seemed impossible. He said he was a physicist and that he had been hired to work at a secret site near Area 51. A location he called S4. And his job was not to design planes, not to test drones, but to study flying saucers. According to Lazar, the US government wasn't just hiding spy planes in the desert, they were hiding 9 recovered alien spacecraft. His assignment was to reverse engineer the technology and figure out how it worked. He described hangars carved into mountainsides, each one housing a disc-shaped craft. He claimed their propulsion system bent gravity itself, powered by an element unknown to science at the time, element 115. He said he witnessed one of the craft being test flown. And the public reaction to this was instant. Overnight, Area 51's reputation shifted. Before Lazar, the base was mysterious, yes, but it was thought of as a testing ground for Cold War planes. After Lazar, it was the alien base. Protesters gathered outside the gates with signs demanding disclosure. UFO conferences exploded in popularity. T-shirts, bumper stickers, hats, and keychains with Area 51 and "They're Here" plastered on them sold across America. The once obscure base in the desert had become a global phenomenon. And in the middle of it was Lazar. He continued to give interviews, he drew diagrams of alien reactors, and he described how the craft tilted on its side to fly and how the pilots inside used gravity waves as if they were bending space itself. And while mainstream scientists scoffed at his claims, millions of ordinary people believed him. He didn't sound like a raving conspiracy theorist. He sounded measured, reasonable, and almost reluctant. And then there were the strange occurrences. For instance, Lazar mentioned element 115 years before it was ever synthesized by scientists. And while the modern version of the element isn't stable like Lazar claimed, believers argue the connection is uncanny. Others point out the security around Area 51 seemed to tighten dramatically after Lazar's story went public, as if the base was reacting to a breach. And then there's what happened to Lazar himself. He said his academic records at Caltech and MIT disappeared. His employment history at Los Alamos vanished. Critics use that as proof that he lied, but his supporters argue the opposite, that the government deliberately erased his past to discredit him. And maybe the strangest ripple of it all came not from science, but from the radio. Throughout the 1990s, late-night host Art Bell turned Lazar's story into a recurring theme on his show, Coast to Coast AM. Millions of insomniacs across the country tuned in, listening to Bell's voice drift through static-filled airwaves, painting pictures of saucers and hangars and government men in black. For many, it was their first exposure to the idea of Area 51, and once you heard it, you couldn't unhear it. Now, we've already covered Lazar's full story in detail on this channel, but here's the key point for Area 51. His testimony forever fused the base with extraterrestrials. Even if you don't believe a single word of it, even if Lazar exaggerated or lied, it does not matter at this point. The idea that Area 51 was home to alien spacecraft and even aliens stuck. Before Lazar, Area 51 was a secret Cold War base. After Lazar, it was the place where government kept aliens. And once that idea took root, it never left. Again, if you ask the government if Area 51 existed, their response was brutally simple. It doesn't exist. If you asked, they shrugged. If you filled a Freedom of Information Act request, they denied it. If you pointed to Groom Lake on a map, officials called it nothing but desert. And for years, that silence only deepened the paranoia. But in 2013, something strange happened. Buried inside a 400-page document quietly declassified by the CIA was a line that stunned researchers. For the first time in history, the US government publicly acknowledged Area 51. It was real. The document described the history of the U-2 spy plane program, finally confirming what many had suspected since the 1950s, that Groom Lake was chosen as a secret test site. It included dry descriptions of runways, hangars, and the painstaking process of developing the world's most advanced aircraft. But there was something missing. Not one word about aliens. Not one word about UFOs. To the government, Area 51 was nothing more than a strip of desert being used to test classified aircraft, and that was their official story. But if the CIA thought this revelation would quiet the conspiracy theorists, they were wrong. Because the admission raised more questions than it answered. If Area 51 was real, what about the stories that came with it? What about the sightings? Lights in the sky, security patrols that seemed to appear out of nowhere. If the government lied about the base existing at all, what else were they still lying about? The mystery only deepened when people looked at the daily routine of the base. Every morning at McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas, a handful of unmarked white passenger planes with a single red stripe take off. They carry no logos, no airline markings, and they're referred to as Janet airplanes. Janet is an acronym standing for just another non-existent terminal. These flights ferry workers back and forth between Las Vegas and Groom Lake. Pilots, engineers, security contractors, they're all flown in and out like clockwork. But no passenger manifest are ever made public. No one on the outside of the program knows exactly who boards those planes and what they do once they land. To this day, it remains one of the most secretive commuter airlines in the world. Old aerial photos and leaked maps show a sprawling complex hidden in the desert. Dozens of hangars, radar towers, strange dome-shaped buildings, runways long enough to land the space shuttle. Over the years, more and more structures have appeared, some massive enough to suggest aircraft bigger than anything the public had ever seen. And yet, the government still provides no details. The documentation stops just short of revealing anything beyond what we already know. And this lack of clarity has fueled suspicion. Conspiracy researchers argue that each Freedom of Information Act release and each redacted paragraph isn't closure, it's bait. Proof that the government is dangling just enough information to keep the public curious, while hiding what's really going on behind the black bars of censorship. The 2013 declassification was supposed to end the mystery of Area 51. Instead, it had the opposite effect. It proved one thing beyond any doubt. If they could lie about the base's existence for more than half a century, what else could they be hiding? And in the years that followed, researchers and locals would point to one unsettling fact. Area 51 wasn't just fading into history, it was growing. So if Area 51 begins with spy planes and becomes the epicenter of a UFO legend, the question is, what is happening now? Because Area 51 isn't just a relic from the Cold War. It isn't abandoned, it's alive, and it's ever expanding. Look at the satellite imagery of Groom Lake today and you'll see something startling. The base is bigger than it ever has been. There's new hangars being built, new runways being paved, massive structures appearing in places that a few years earlier were nothing but empty desert. Some of the buildings are so large, analysts speculate they could house aircraft bigger than anything the public has ever been shown. But here's the thing. Nobody outside those gates knows what's going on inside. Officially, the base is dedicated to testing advanced military aircraft, and history backs that up. The U-2, the SR-71 Blackbird, the F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter. All of them were born in secrecy at Groom Lake. So when people suggest today's Area 51 is testing the next generation of stealth drones, hypersonic aircraft, or even directed energy weapons, that theory doesn't sound too far-fetched. Then there's the stories. Locals still talk about lights zigzagging across the night sky, moving in ways no known plane can. Bright orbs that hover silently then vanish in an instant. Long, thin streaks of light that dart from horizon to horizon, too fast to be anything man-made. And whenever a new UFO video surfaces online, like the Navy's now famous Tic Tac encounters, people connect the dots back to Nevada. Could Area 51 be where these craft were developed, tested, or even stored? The truth is, nobody can say for sure. And then there's activity on the ground. Camo dudes have not gone away. Hikers still report being shadowed by white trucks that appear from nowhere and disappear just as suddenly. Locals whisper that security patrols are harsher than ever and that the military presence has expanded beyond the marked perimeter. Even the Janet flights, those mysterious white jets with the red stripe, they're busier than ever. Dozens of workers are flown in and out every day. But what they're working on remains sealed under the thickest classification laws the government has. And here's the unsettling part. Area 51 today is more active than it was during the Cold War, and yet we know less about it than we did then. And that's the paradox of Groom Lake, really. For decades, the government denied it existed. Then they admitted just enough to make it real. And now with the entire world watching, it's only grown. So what's inside those hangars? Advanced drones, hypersonic weapons, or something stranger? We don't know, and maybe we're not supposed to. Because if history has taught us anything about Area 51, it's this: the more you dig, the stranger it gets. And as long as those desert skies remain filled with lights no one can explain, Groom Lake's biggest secret is still out there, hiding in plain sight. Maybe it's alien ships, maybe it's weapons decades ahead of their time, or maybe the real secret of Area 51 is how the government turned secrecy into a weapon itself. One that fuels the greatest UFO legend of all time. This was The Other Side. My name is John. Thank you for watching.